Hi and welcome to AXSchat. We're delighted to welcome back Dave Baines, who is a returning guest. It's been a while, or at least it's been a while since we featured you on AXSchat, so we're very glad to have you back. I know we chatted in person in Washington a couple of weeks back, but also this time we seem to have had slightly less technical difficulties than the previous time, so we can actually see you. This is a step forwards. So welcome, Dave.
I don't think it is any great benefit, to be absolutely honest with you personally. But yeah, let's move on quickly from that subject.
So how are you, and what have you been up to?
What have I been up to? Yeah, I've been busy. I'm very well, I think. So yeah, the last couple of months have been doing a number of pieces of work. Still doing quite a bit of work around the issues of refugees with a disability and special needs. And we're continuing to build our project in that area. I'm currently in Dubai, where we're looking at developing and supporting the development of AT services here within the United Arab Emirates. I've been doing quite a bit of work around entrepreneurs, and still with this underlying interest in how the delivery of assistive technology and access and accessibility is going to change over the next few years. The whole issues of disruptive technologies and disruptive models of business.
Okay, so it seems like you're keeping yourself very busy.
It's nice to be panicking every now and then.
I know Deborah's got a question, so I'll let Deborah speak.
David, yeah, thank you, Neil. David, welcome back to the program. I know that when we interviewed you before, and I'm forgetting now if you had just left your post in Qatar or Qatar, but do you mind telling our audience what you're doing now? You have your own company now, and I know you're doing a lot of work in the Middle East and other countries, but yeah, catch us up.
That's right. No, I think I was still in Qatar when we last spoke. No, I left in April of last year and set my own business up, really to do training and consultancy. And that's been really interesting because it's taken me to new parts of the world. I've been over to Pakistan. We've been working quite a bit in the Middle East. I was up in Iceland this week and then over to the US. And really looking at how globally, how people are getting the technologies that they need and how that's supporting them in terms of access, really from policy right through to practice, and how we bridge that gap between policy and practice at either national, organizational, or local level. So it's been quite diverse, which has been exciting, but a lot of common themes keep turning up.
Okay, and I know that when we've talked over previous times, you've been involved in work to improve the proliferation of assistive technologies in Arabic language. I'm guessing if you're going to Pakistan and Iceland, you're coming across many of the same barriers, which is that most of the AT is European Latin language centric.
Absolutely right. I mean, we always used to say with Arabic, it was the 5th largest language in the world. When we talked about assistive technologies, really limited resources available. And as you know, as we go right across to other parts of the world, this is a common issue. So I was just chatting to somebody from Nepal just earlier on today, and very, very common problems emerge. And it's not just the end result, the products, it's actually the building blocks, things like voice recognition, things like text-to-speech, just aren't available to support the development of AT in those languages. And increasingly, I think these are the underlying foundation issues that we need to be thinking about addressing as a community, because without those, we're not going to progress this anyway quickly.
Yeah. So I think we're at risk of having a two-speed inclusion process where the rich Western Anglo-centric world is getting a better chance of inclusion than the rest of the globe. Although I think when you alluded to disruptive technologies, actually that's where we have a chance of changing the game. And we know that deep learning is making huge impacts on things like natural language processing and the ability of speech and translation engines to work better. So, for example, I know that pretty much overnight, Google Translate got a lot better when they applied all of the deep learning tools that they developed. So we have reason to be hopeful as well as some caution, I think.
Oh, and I would agree with you completely, Neil. I mean, I remember saying at a conference a couple of years ago that the future for accessibility really lay in the potential of AI and machine learning to transform data. By which I meant was exactly that issue, which, we can take language, we can translate it into text, and then we can translate it into other languages. We can do that relatively speedily, and I think it is this area that is going to make the most difference in the immediate future. And I think the challenge is how do we I find myself almost a little bit schizophrenic at the moment. I'm in the West, I'm talking to people about issues like home automation, the rise of wearables, and then I'm going to countries where we're still talking about, okay, how do we develop basic AAC apps for children with autism, cerebral palsy, and so on. So this split, this dichotomy, and I think if we're not careful, that can only get worse, and that's not good for us globally as a society.
No, I agree. Antonio, I think you've got a comment?
Yeah, yes, I know. We observed recently that cameras are being used to identify objects, and applying machine learning to identify objects and within different pictures. And also we know that there are a few number of apps that are being used for people to do sports or to do jogging and activities outside, that they are using voiceover almost like if you are watching a movie like Netflix. So we see this type of technologies being used in areas that being developed in spaces that are not directly related with accessibility, in sort of a kind of a occasional way. So what is when you look back to this type of technology that we see around it, how do you see the fact that how can we use technology that was not designed directly for accessibility, but can actually be used for that purpose? Do you see that it's important to do a kind of a due diligence to understand those apps and those systems and try to figure out how can you take all benefit from them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've got a long history in this area of people using mainstream apps to support people with disabilities. So one of the ones which always struck me, and even was something like Uber. And whilst we know there are many issues with Uber and wheelchair accessible vehicles, guide dogs and so on, actually Uber was an unbelievably effective and useful tool for people with hearing loss, and particularly those who were deaf, because they no longer had to phone a taxi company to get a taxi sent to them. They didn't then have to explain to the driver where they were going and how to get there. The technology did that for them. So we have this interesting thing with disruptive innovation of unintended consequences. And I think some of the things around Google Translate and similar are going to have a series of unintended consequences, some of which are going to be very positive, some of which are going to be more challenging. I think another really good example would be Airbnb. I know wheelchair users who now nearly book all their holiday accommodation from Airbnb, booking it from other wheelchair users around the world. So they've got a much more stronger foundation. And that's probably a much better situation than saying we're going to create an app just for wheelchair users to find rooms that are accessible. So yes, that mainstreaming and that disruption of industries can become really quite inclusive if done well.
I think that's a really interesting point, because quite often we see a proliferation of these accessibility information apps. So you've got Ewan's Guide, you've got Disabled Go, and really what we ought to be doing is using them as feeds that the major platforms could then ingest that information, because actually people want to be going to a mainstream site to book, if at all possible, because they want the breadth of choice, right? But at the same time, they want the information, and that they know that they're going to be able to book, like you say, via Airbnb from other wheelchair users. So if that information can be effectively, rather than siloed in apps, but be used as a feed to be ingested into these platforms, I think that could be really quite enabling.
I think you're absolutely right. Do you remember I don't even know if it's still available. This was a thing called Lay AR.
Layer, yes, I remember. Yeah.
And that was really nice. It was an augmented reality app, but you layered it with your own particular things of interest. And that I thought was a really interesting model. I think the other thing that's interesting is we can turn this whole thing on its head. So let's take an example. Let's take an app like Waze.
Yeah.
Now, Waze is used as a navigation app. Let's put forward a scenario where people with disabilities could identify themselves as a person with disability within Waze. If we could then collectivize the data about where people with disabilities were traveling to and compare that to the data for all other users within their demographic, we would get some really interesting data about the reality of accessible locations, because almost certainly those differences would be attributed to the difference in accessibility through locations. So we'd be able to see differences, say, in restaurant use, museums, arts, culture, by actually tracking where within a city was a priority for people with different needs. So we can actually turn that whole idea of saying, okay, rather than gathering data through a specialist app, we can use the mainstream app, customize it to give us data which actually is independent of the disability movement. And I think that is another interesting challenge and issue that we could use in the future.
No, and there's an interesting development that is users are continually using the app, so it will be organically expanding and updating. Yeah, that will be, yeah.
Yeah. So then as we have initiatives that change accessibility of sites around a city, we should see through that data that's being gathered a broadening of where people are going to. And if not, then we have questions, why not? What's the barrier that's emerging? Why are people not going to these locations following an initiative?
So is that mean that it's up to us to influence people at Waze to do something like
Absolutely.
that? What?
Yeah. Or simply, it's a big question, because of course then you've got all issues of confidentiality and so on. But if somebody is volunteering that they have a disability, what form of disability, and their data can be gathered and anonymously analysed, that would be something for somebody like Waze or Google Maps and Directions and all these sorts of different things to consider. And that data could be quite valuable and could be something which actually could then be used and sold validly, but actually support people with disabilities by increasing the accessibility of the mainstream app.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Deborah, you have another question, I believe.
I agree. Things like that are a good idea. Of course, people would get nervous. You know, is this data going to be used against me? Maybe I've got my US lenses on, but, you know, and that's why it's called disruption. But I had the to talk to Malcolm from Uber on my program. It's going to air on Wednesday, and Uber, of course, has been walking a lot of a lot of interesting problems. And at one point he called it stumbling, and I thought that was a good word to use. We were very candid because there's recently been, the CEO stepped down, a board member made a sexist comment at an all employees meeting, and that board member resigned, and how can Uber take all of those things and continue to add value to society? But one thing that they were doing, besides the things for people that are deaf, which I think is very powerful, both for drivers that are deaf and for passengers that are deaf of hard of hearing. And my husband has joined officially those ranks. He just got a hearing aid for the first first time. It's amazing what these hearing aids do now. I was jealous as I was listening to the really cool things that he gets to do in his hearing aid. So it's just amazing where the technology is going. But it turns out that he has very severe hearing loss and probably has for many years. So he's not just ignoring his wife. But the comment that I thought was very interesting that Uber was saying about trying to solve the issues of Uber drivers ignoring people that are in wheelchairs because their cars, can't accommodate the drivers and things like that. But buying fleets of cars that have wheelchair lifts in them and doing really, really interesting things that are going to make transportation more available to all of us, I think is fascinating. So watching a company that's grown as fast as Uber learn and try to evolve on the fly is also very interesting. Well, what else can we learn, David?
Throw into that.
All this disruption that's happening.
Yeah. We arrived in, all things are possible. We arrived in Dubai last night at 3 a.m. or so, flying in. And we decided we would see if we could get an Uber to our hotel. And we're skipping through the options on Uber. And we have the normal ones. And then at the end is Uber Copter, which is actually booking your helicopter through Uber. And we thought, you're at an airport, it's probably a 2-minute flight to our hotel. No, we didn't. We got the cheapest Uber possible. But all things are possible. And I think one of the things that we've seen with access and accessibility, which is why I'm excited by globally seeing new players innovate, is we're seeing creativity and imagination applied to old problems. And we may have had solutions, but they may not have been the only solution or even the best solution for the future. And I think that is really quite exciting. And what sort of helps me sort of track through all the stories that come up every day of what's going on is seeing that creativity emerging.
I know we've debated this. I think it was on Instagram, wasn't it? Because I said, don't reinvent, or maybe on Twitter, don't reinvent, invent solutions to problems that have already been solved. But you're right. It depends on how you're addressing that problem. And if you have a more elegant solution, I think my issue was that I quite often see people trying to enter the accessibility market having not done any basic market research, and then bringing forward another version of a product that's already out there, and then diluting that market effectively. What we want is new solutions, not more of the same. And I think if you want to comment on that, please do. Yeah.
I just want to say something that's a little bit smart alecky, but I'm not going to name names. So I was recently at a conference that some of y'all were also at, so I'll let and there was a lot of new kids on the blocks. Love to see the new kids coming into the accessibility space, wanting to make a difference. But there was one provider there that said, all you have to do is one line of code. Accessible. I was like, wow, wouldn't that be really cool? So I went over to these really, really amazing, lovely people, and I said, so how this works, tell me how one line of code is going to make my entire website accessible. And I said, I find I'm not sure how technically that one line of code is going to make all of your videos captioned. I don't understand how that one line of code is going to take a PDF document that was scanned in and is now one image accessible. I'm not sure how that one line of code makes drop-down boxes. I was sort of trying to make a point here, and they were like, oh, no, it can't do those things. And I said, well, you're in the United States, and if you sell this and corporations buy it, and they're going to get sued, because one line of code will not make your website accessible or compliant. Will it take you further down the road? Absolutely, it probably will. But in the United States, where litigation, we're seeing litigation. We just saw a very important one with Winn-Dixie, and there's one with Hobbytown. I forget. I'm saying their name wrong, but I agree with what you're saying, Neil, in that please join this field. Please join the field. Give us your technology. Give us your brilliant, your great ideas about really changing the world for people with disabilities. But take the time to really understand this field. Join the Access chats. You know, there's a lot of data out there, but it's almost, I almost felt sorry for them because they're at a conference where there's a lot of experts saying things that I know they mean well, but it's buyer beware. So I'll stop on that point. But David, let me turn it to you or back to you, Neil.
Go on, David.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a distinction to be made between what's often called disruptive and sustaining innovations. So sustaining innovations are those that just move things on a little bit, and they often are, they can be the same thing done a little bit differently, or there can be extra functionality added onto products and so on. But disruption is not just about the technology, it's about changing the business model as well. And that, I think, is one of the other huge things that emerges as we talk about trends. The shift away from PCs to other platforms has changed the business model by which assistive technologies are delivered. And that's got big implications for how we are funded in the future, how assessment, evaluation, and training are delivered. All of those things, that's a very cuddly dog.
That's our mascot. That's our mascot.
He was pestering me.
That's a brilliant technique for saying, let's see if we can help David lose his train of thought at this point. And it doesn't take much.
I was trying to stop him from barking because he was looking up at me, sort of giving me the "give me food" eyes.
Yeah, I do that as well, actually, funnily enough.
So do I.
Never gets me anyway. But yeah, that change in user behaviour. I think you were saying about not doing the same thing. Actually, The other thing which is changing is user expectations.
True.
They don't want their technologies delivered to them in a way that takes weeks, months for delivery. They're expecting things to be delivered to them very, very quickly, because that's how we get all our content. On demand means on demand. Why should AT be any different?
Yeah, and I think that obviously with a lot of the stuff that's happening now, the core building blocks of a lot of the technologies are available, and they're compartmentalized. You can put a lot of this stuff together pretty quickly, and you can stand up stuff in the cloud. Before, you'd have to, if you were building software, you'd have to invest in a whole bunch of engineers, most likely racks and racks of servers, all of this kind of stuff. Now you can just rent the space. You can rent capacity. Yeah. So and a lot of the time you can even do it for free for the first, you can afford to try something and fail within the trial period for your subscription for some cloud-based service.
Yep.
So the likelihood is that we're going to see more innovation, not less, in this space, and hopefully it's going to shorten the time scales for delivery as well.
Now, the problem we have, to come back to our earlier discussion around global issues, is connectivity. Yeah. So again, as this trend within the West moves towards more online delivery of technologies and so on, software as a service, all these trends, what does that mean where we have low bandwidth, low resourced countries? And certainly, I've been doing some pro bono work in parts of Africa, and actually the inconsistency of connection is a second really significant barrier to providing access and accessibility as we think about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. So things like speech recognition, which in the West and in areas where you've got good connectivity, remote processing works fine, but as soon as you lose signal, everything falls over. So you don't get any signaling, or Siri goes, "Sorry, I can't help you." So connectivity is absolutely a huge issue. I know that some of the tech giants are working on big infrastructure projects, effectively trying to float balloons over remote parts of the world, have solar powered drones beaming down WiMAX which is the sort of long-range Wi-Fi to give signal. And I know that both Google, Facebook are all trying to solve the connectivity problem. Not entirely altruistically, because obviously what that's doing is opening up markets for their products as well. But people do benefit from the fact that they will be providing connectivity, and we need that in order to be able to run a lot of these modern products. But you're right, it doesn't have the robustness that we need. And if you're reliant on technology, and one of the core tenets of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is robustness. It's got to work, and if you're relying on it and it doesn't, and it's flaky, then that's really problematic.
Yeah, and much as I love new technologies, and I get excited about new technologies, there are times to look back at existing, stable, robust technologies, to use your word. So we were looking at delivery of education to refugees at a UNESCO conference in Paris, and one of the things that was within the systems they were talking about was the use of FM radio to deliver education. And actually, for some people, actually being able to just listen to somebody talking, lecturing, discussing via FM radio was actually the most effective way of accessing an education. So this blend of techniques and technologies, I talk a lot about it, the need for things to be delivered in fluid ways, that you choose the channel not only according to your disability, but to your context, your bandwidth, your content you want. And actually, you need fluidity to allow you to move from one to the other, depending on a range of issues, not only your disability.
Yeah, well, I think we often see SMS as old technology, and yet it's still one of the most effective ways of communication. It's low cost, low bandwidth, and massive penetration. Pretty much, you can pretty much reach anyone by SMS.
And how many times have we all been, and this is this contextual disability. You're in the countryside, the only signal you've got is a basic signal. You haven't got 3G, you haven't got Edge or whatever, but a basic phone signal. If you want to talk to somebody, then SMS is what you revert to. And it's not a problem. It works extremely well for what it does. So that's a really good example of us moving fluidly, depending on the context within which we're in, that situational disability that emerges.
Yeah, and with you and in Africa, where you've had the bandwidth problems, and you've not had the 3G, and you've not had the data signal, they've been using SMS as the way to do mobile banking. Yeah. And that's enabled people to have access to money and access to information about farming and seeds and prices and all of these kind of things that are transforming the way people live their lives.
Yeah, and we can build upon that foundation in different ways. We don't have to ignore it and completely disrupt it. We can build upon it at times.
Yeah. And Tanya, did you have a question?
No. I was in fact reading some of the comments from Deborah. So, but if you look to the current situation, we have been talking about trends. So if you look to the developments that we see today in terms of augmented reality, virtual reality, machine learning, is there a particular technology that might excite you more than others? Is that to say, okay, there's something here that we really need to pay attention, and we need to be early adopters to see how we can test it and implement it in our industry?
There's two things that are really exciting me at the moment. One is the rise of the wearable. I got my Apple Watch about 2 months ago, and I'm already at that stage of thinking, I'm not quite sure how I lived without this. It's a little bit of a first world issue, but actually in terms of rapid, easy access to an interface that's available to me every minute of the day, if I want to go to bed still wearing it, it's actually really interesting. And as such, it provides a whole new range of opportunities for development of ATs, particularly around sometimes alerting systems for the deaf, people with Alzheimer's and so on. So that's one. And then looking further ahead, augmented reality. I think, if the one thing that we know is people need data presented in multiple ways. So the potential for augmented reality to explore an environment and present data from within that environment in a very wide range of alternative formats, I think again is unbelievably exciting. We saw a little bit at the Google Glass, we've seen a little bit with other things. Some of the new technologies like Microsoft's HoloLens that are emerging are actually going to make that a reality for us in the next few years.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
David, yeah, it's funny you should mention the Apple Watch. I moved over to Apple a few years ago, and I love Apple products. And I got Sarah, my daughter with trisomy 21, commonly referred to as Down syndrome, except in my household. She and I both have a weight problem, and I've been really worried about her because over the last year she's gained more weight, and as a mom, I'm just worried about her. So I thought something that's going to track her miles, because we've tried odometers, we tried the Fitbit, the earlier versions of the Fitbit. So I looked at all of the different reviews and everything, and I decided after a big sell at Best Buy to go ahead and get both of us Apple Watches. And I felt a little, like I was spending money, maybe, that, I wasn't sure if it was really going to be a good, deal, for us. But what happened was Sarah gets on, she puts it on. I explained to her how it worked. We show how, I show her how it works with the watch, of course, how it ties to her phone. And Sarah immediately gets it and is much better at it than I am, which is typical. She's very good with technology. But the benefits that came out of it surprised me. She would, I would go into her room to say goodnight to her before she would go to bed, and she wouldn't be in her room. She'd be in her closet, and she would be dancing. And I'm like, Sarah, it's almost bedtime. What are you doing? And she's like, oh, I haven't gotten all my steps yet. So it's almost like makes Sarah unique is she has a little OCD going, which her mom probably does too. And so it's like, I'm supposed to get 10,000 steps according to my watch, and I'm going to get 10,000 steps, even if it takes me till 1 o'clock in the morning. So there are these things, and the little things that says drink water, breathe. And I have found it to be good for the health benefits. It has health benefits for our family. So, and also there's some of the other products that were competing with the Apple Watch for the reason why I wanted them. They're only a little bit less expensive, but they don't have the same functionality. Now, sometimes I buy functionality and then I don't use it, but I agree with you. I think some of these new technologies, they're going to be very powerful for individuals with disabilities. So, and I know that in the chat window, Antonio mentioned gamification is really working. So I think there's a lot of things to be hopeful for. We just have to continue with all these disruptions to make sure that people with disabilities are meaningfully included and that their voices are being heard in this technology as well. So I'll pass it to you and then over to Neil.
I was talking with John Kemp at the Viscardi Centre after we'd been to Enabling, and we were talking about some of the challenges, for instance, you have with people with learning disabilities in getting them to understand how to dental hygiene, how to clean their teeth. It can result in a lot of pain and discomfort. So I go explain to them, okay, here's a scenario. My final thought for the day. I have a Bluetooth-enabled toothbrush. My toothbrush connects to my iPad. And on my Bluetooth-enabled toothbrush, currently, it shows me which area of my mouth I should be cleaning at that time. Okay, but what then happens? Let's apply that gamification process for people with learning disabilities. Let's see, it says, okay, you're going to see on your iPad a scenario that looks like your mouth, and we're going to show you, we want you to kill the creatures on your teeth with your toothbrush. So as you go to the place that's shown on your map, you brush away using your electric toothbrush, it gradually disappears, and then another one turns up, and another tooth, and you've got to move and start cleaning another part of your mouth.
Okay.
So this is exciting. This is how we get around some of these barriers. And that's where that creativity kicks back in. And I know I promise that's the last thing I'll say, Neil. I promise you.
Yeah, but that's a cool one. I want that right now for Sarah. I want that right now for myself, for my husband.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much, David. It's been great. We've covered a broad range of topics again. I'm sounding like Jonathan Wass. You won't know who he is, Deborah, but anyone that's been in the UK will. So thank you. We'll wave goodbye now and look forward to joining you for AXSchat on Tuesday night.
Look forward to it. You take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Happy 4th of July to US people.